Tonight on Ukraine Today, winter terror. How is Russia trying to plunge Ukraine into cold and darkness? And why have the occupiers intensified their attacks right now? Special operation in the Caspian Sea. Ukraine's defense forces struck 3 Lukoil drilling platforms. Oreshnik missile, new details. What did Ukrainian engineers discover after examining the debris and surviving parts of the missile? Iran in flames. Can the fall of the ayatollahs regime weaken the Kremlin as well? All this and more, right now. Hello, my name is Volodymyr Robchun and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, like this video and let's get to the news. A quiet night before what should have been a calm start to a busy and interesting Monday. I believe somewhere in the world the week really begins like that, but this is how a week starts in Ukraine, a country that has terrorist Russia as its neighbor. Damaged buildings, shattered windows, burned cars. These are the consequences of a nighttime enemy drone attack on Kyiv. After a UAV strike, a fire broke out in the Solomiansky district. Educational facilities were also damaged. After previous attacks, many residents of Kyiv are still facing problems with heating and water supply. In addition, overnight, Russian forces attacked Odessa and the Odessa region. Residential buildings and an infrastructure facility were damaged. Power supply problems are reported in the city and in the region. Because of another Russian attack, a critical energy facility was damaged in the Chernihiv region. A number of settlements were left without electricity. That's how the week begins.
Resilience points have been deployed across the country. In all regions, teams from Ukrzaliznytsia, Naftogaz and other state-owned companies are involved. Dnipro region, Zaporizhzhia region, Kharkiv region, Donetsk region. Our energy workers are everywhere right now. Repair crews, all utility services, those who truly work, who are truly doing incredible and genuinely heroic things. Harsh winter weather adds more challenges. That is exactly why it is so difficult, and exactly this kind of weather the Russians are trying to take advantage of. And I thank every man and every woman in Ukraine who, through these repairs, through this restoration work, despite everything, are standing for the protection of life.
I would detain Putin. These are the words of UK Defense Secretary John Healey, spoken during his visit to Kyiv. He was answering a journalist's question about which world leader he would like to kidnap. Healey said he would hold Putin accountable for what he saw in Bucha during one of his first visits to Ukraine, and for the abduction of Ukrainian children. Ukraine's defense forces struck 3 Lukoil drilling platforms in the waters of the Caspian Sea. They are involved in supporting the Russian army and are therefore legitimate targets. Also, Ukrainian forces hit a Bukan-3 air defense launcher in the temporarily occupied territory of the Luhansk region, as well as a Russian logistic warehouse in the temporarily occupied part of the Kherson region. Over the past day alone, Russia lost at least 1,060 occupiers killed and wounded. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, total Russian losses have now reached 1,220,000 troops. In the last 24 hours, Ukraine's defense forces also destroyed 7 Russian armored combat vehicles, 21 artillery systems and dozens of other units of enemy military equipment. And now a closer look at what is happening on the front line and around it.
The Russian dictator, who craves ever more blood, has used Iran 5 attack drones against Ukraine for the first time. These are drones with a warhead weighing about 90 kilograms and a strike range of around 1,000 kilometers. According to available information, the enemy is also exploring options for deploying the Geran 5 from aerial platforms, particularly Su-25 aircraft, in order to increase its range and reduce operational costs. The main intelligence directorate of Ukraine additionally states that Russia is actively considering equipping this particular drone with specialized air-to-air missiles in order to effectively counter Ukrainian aviation capabilities. Unfortunately, the enemy did not stop there. In addition to the Geran, the Kremlin is planning to test experimental missile prototypes for the Tu-95 and Tu-160 strategic bombers in the skies over Ukraine in the near future. These include the KH-BDK cruise missiles as well as the hypersonic KH-99 and KH-MTs. The KBDK is designed for the 295 MS and is considered an analog of the K101. It has a range of up to 3,000 kilometers, a speed of about 900 kilometers per hour, and an extremely low flight altitude of 30 to 70 meters, which makes it difficult for air defense systems to detect. The KH-99 is a hypersonic missile for the Tu-160M with a speed of up to 6,600 kilometers per hour and a range of up to 5,500 kilometers. The Kach-MTs is a hypersonic anti-ship missile with a range of up to 900 kilometers and a speed of up to 4,200 kilometers per hour. It is being considered as a replacement for the KH-22. It is noteworthy that the new Kremlin weaponry is supposed to be entirely of Russian manufacture, which is extremely dangerous, analysts explain. The rejection of foreign components has significantly reduced the accuracy of the new missiles and increased the risk of indiscriminate strikes, which poses an additional threat to the civilian population. Despite the colossal losses suffered by the Russian army, the occupiers continue to press along the front line every day and fall into skillfully arranged traps set by the Ukrainian armed forces. One such trap for the occupiers was the illusion of an advance in Rabovska, Sumy region. While Kremlin-Z military correspondents were praising their own for capturing yet another settlement, it turned out that the Russian army had fallen into a Ukrainian trap. Russian contract soldiers control the village, but they are stuck there without food, water, or ammunition. And all this is happening under constant fire from the Ukrainian armed forces. Nevertheless, Russian troops are increasing pressure on the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces. For example, the Oskil River near Kupiansk, which had long held back the occupiers, has frozen over, and now they are trying to cross the ice right next to the positions of our defenders.
They are playing a certain role there. They are trying to cross it. Now there is ice, and unfortunately sometimes they manage to do it.
According to Viktor Trehubov, head of communications for the Joint Forces Group, within Kupiansk itself, the river does not pose serious problems, since Ukrainian forces control both banks. But north of the city, the situation is more complicated.
Well, they are pressing quite actively, especially on the eastern bank of the Oskil. They are trying to push the Ukrainians off the eastern bank, but without much success.
But even Russian propagandists themselves acknowledge the successes of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Pokrovsk direction. With regret, they report the loss of an entire column of equipment. Ukrainian drones skillfully struck the enemy convoy of vehicles, which was trying to use the sunrise over Pokrovsk as cover. And here, the Apache unit is destroying the enemy in the Serebryansky forest area, where the adversary is trying to concentrate its forces for further offensives. Instead of storming, the Russian contract soldiers all went en masse to a concert for Kobzon. Things aren't going well for the occupiers now in the southern Slobozansky direction either. There, units of the Kharkiv border detachment destroyed 6 pieces of equipment, 13 shelters, 2 communication antennas, and at least 1 enemy mortar over the past day. Here's another literally explosive operation by the Ukrainian armed forces from the Vovchansk direction. It really blew the occupiers' minds. As a result of the self-propelled artillery battalion strikes on enemy infantry and artillery shelters, the occupiers lost several dozen soldiers and a significant portion of their ammunition. Thanks to the coordinated work of the Ukrainian armed forces, the Russians also lost in the same sector of the front 2 S-7 Pion guns, 2 vans, 2 antennas, a car and a motorcycle.
The United Kingdom will develop new long-range ballistic missiles for Ukraine. This was announced by representatives of the British government. The project is called Nightfall. The new missiles are expected to carry a 200 kilograms warhead and have a range of more than 500 kilometers. Since we're already talking about ballistic missiles, it's worth recalling that Russia has now, for at least the second time, used the Oreshnik missile against Ukraine. It has now become clear what this weapon actually is. Ukrainian engineers have obtained additional debris and surviving components of the missile and have reached a number of important and interesting conclusions. Here are the details.
It was prepared for launch for an entire year, but its reuse turned out to be even more disastrous than the previous attempt. The strike by the Oreshnik on the Lviv region is revealing more and more details, which demonstrate the complete failure of the Russian missile program. Experts note that the missile that struck Lviv region on January 8th was assembled from several old Soviet ones and is not a new project by Russian engineers, but rather a banal modernization of intercontinental ballistic missiles created back in the USSR.
This missile is a modernized version of a standard intercontinental ballistic missile. Why do I keep insisting on this? Because if it were just an ordinary ballistic missile, the Russian Federation would not have notified the United States that it planned to launch a missile that could imitate the flight of an intercontinental ballistic missile and potentially strike Europe or the United States.
Ukrainian specialists who studied the fragments of the Oreshnik missile that landed in the Lviv region also found confirmation of this version. Among the pile of scrap metal, a good portion of the surviving parts were made in the Soviet Union, as indicated by the corresponding markings.
They found old Soviet-made tubes. Everything here is old. Old, very old, like this particular one here, for example.
Some components haven't changed at all since the time of Yuri Gagarin's spaceflight. They are still assembled according to blueprints from the 1950s and used in modern Russian weaponry, which is proudly called unparalleled. Probably because all the analogs have long since rotted away.
There was nothing particularly terrible about its use. Here's a gyroscope from Oreshnik. Even Yuri Gagarin flew with one like this.
Analysts believe that the launch of Oreshnik did not have any military objective. The missile, without a warhead, was deliberately sent closer to the EU borders as a hint that supposedly we could strike you too. However, even here, Putin's general staff miscalculated, showing that there is no stability whatsoever when launching Oreshnik.
The first time they did it near Dnipro, the second time they did it near Lviv. So if near Dnipro they failed, then near Lviv they completely embarrassed themselves. Because again, it should be noted that anyone who closely watched the submunitions approaching the target point saw a completely different angle and a completely different distribution of these warheads. In other words, we're saying that the second attempt to use this missile was also unsuccessful.
Speaking of the uneven dispersal of submunitions, it's worth recalling the issue of accuracy. Oreshnik is also unfamiliar with it. The Russian Federation's claim of a strike on a gas storage facility in the Lviv region was not confirmed. The so-called wonder weapon simply missed.
This is not a precision weapon. It hasn't been fully developed yet. Well, the project was closed in 2018. Because Iskander missiles, Iskander K, Iskander M, Kaliber 101, they would cause much more damage than the meteor shower called Oreshnik. It's a meteor shower. These blanks just crash into the ground at high speed.
But we shouldn't forget that Oreshnik can also be equipped with a nuclear warhead, in which case accuracy doesn't matter much. However, if that were to happen, the political consequences for Putin would be devastating.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. And now's the time to subscribe, like this video and share it, so more people can see it. Thank you, and glory to Ukraine. Norway will allocate $400 million in aid to Ukraine. This was announced by the country's foreign minister Espen Barth Eide, who is currently in Kiev. Half of the funds will be used immediately for urgent winter needs, gas purchases and energy infrastructure repairs. The remaining $200 million will go toward budget support. While the rational part of humanity is helping Ukraine to survive, Russia is busy trying to extend the life of its dictator. Who is responsible for this project? A great question. Putin's daughter, Maria Vorontsova. She is being given unlimited resources for this purpose. And ordinary Russians? What about their empty wallets and fridges? They will probably endure it. Putin needs it more.
Putin's daughter Maria Vorontsova, who is actively involved in life extension. Officially, as a Russian citizen and the daughter of her dictator father, she has received a new position.
It's very important that the issue of longevity is being addressed specifically by Vladimir Vladimirovich's daughter. You see, the special military operation is ongoing now, and it could drag on for a long time. Then, it's quite possible that other wars will start, and they could last another 20 to 30 years. In these circumstances, Russia needs a strong leader. It would be very good if Vladimir Vladimirovich remained in office. Therefore, ensuring him a long and productive life is the most important task.
Vorontsova has become the director of the Medical Science and Education Institute at Moscow State University. In this position, Putin's daughter will continue to work on extending her father's life. And in the Kremlin, they don't even hide the fact that this is about extending the lives of the country's main people. In other words, ordinary Russians are not even being considered at all.
First, the main people of our country will get this opportunity, and only later will many others. And Vladimir Vladimirovich's daughter has already taken a step toward achieving this goal, the channel's interlocutor summarized.
And here, so to speak. On this occasion, I'd like to recall something. The private conversation between Xi Jinping and Putin about the possibility of living to 150 years old. This conversation took place back in September, on the 25th, and it was accidentally recorded and leaked online.
In the past, people rarely lived to 70 years old. But today at 70, you're still a child.
Thanks to advances in biotechnology, human organs can be transplanted continuously, and people will be able to live longer and longer. And even achieve true immortality.
The forecasts are that in this century, there is a chance to live to 150 years old.
A few weeks later, Putin instructed his daughter, Maria Vorontsova, to head a project aimed at extending the lifespan of Russians and increasing the birth rate. And already in November, Putin publicly spoke about his desire to live to 100 or even 150 years.
The average age in certain countries, on other planets as well, has started to increase 35, 45, 50 years. That's fine too. Now in some countries it's already 80, and we are striving for our average age to reach that as well. For women it's a bit higher, for men a bit lower. We even set specific goals for ourselves to increase average life expectancy. And we're doing everything right. It's probably possible to reach 150 years. But first of all, it will always feel like it's not enough. Just like with money. Always.
And here the question arises, how seriously is the Kremlin committed to the issue of extending Putin's life? And is there any progress on this issue, or is it still just talk for now?
Well, of course, it's nothing more than a myth. Of course, it's nothing more than a political technology tactic. And nothing groundbreaking or extraordinary has been achieved yet.
The next question that naturally comes up here is the fact that in recent months we've heard more statements about life extension than in the past several decades.
So when Putin phrases it as scientists working on extending life, that potentially... And he also says that this is for Russians, not just for himself. He says that Russians will also be able to live much longer. And in general, we're doing something very useful for everyone. And so that you can gain a few more years of your life, and with my help, with stability, also a certain number of additional years, then support me in all my undertakings. And above all, in the direction of developing such technologies, which in fact is what Putin's daughter is working on. That's why it's a brilliant political technology move. It unites not only the elites around Putin, with whom he might also partially share these technologies, but also ordinary people. And
for now, ordinary Russians. In the fourth year of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, while people are barely making ends meet, Putin is allocating enormous sums of money to a life extension project overseen by his daughter.
Finally, events in Iran, a partner and weapons supplier to Russia. The Islamic Republic is gripped by protests against the ayatollahs regime. How are events developing, and how could this affect Russia's war against Ukraine? All the details next.
Hundreds of thousands of people are taking to the streets in response to the largest anti-government protests in years. The Iranian authorities are tightening the screws even further. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has declared the protest organizers to be terrorists. Iran's Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who currently lives in the United States, has called on Iranians to intensify the protests.
Your renewed and glorious presence on the streets of Iran has been a crushing response to the threats of the treacherous and criminal leader of the Islamic Republic. Our goal is not just to take to the streets, our goal is to prepare to seize and defend the centers of our cities.
The protests began on December 28th in Tehran in response to massive inflation and the collapse of the local currency. Initially, the demonstrations did not have a political undertone. Over time, they escalated and took on an anti-government character. In response to the looming threat, Iranian security forces and the army opened fire on opponents of Ayatollah Khomeini's regime. At present, there are reports of casualties and injuries on both the protesters' side and among government forces. The authorities have completely shut down the internet. The only way to communicate with the outside world is through Starlink terminals. Western media report that at least 200 people have died during the harsh and bloody crackdown. State media controlled by Khomeini's regime claim that more than 2,000 people have been arrested in Iranian cities.
Last night in Tehran, a group of vandals and rioters came and destroyed a building that belonged to the state, to the people themselves, just to please the President of the United States.
The President of the United States is adding fuel to the fire in Iran. Since the protests began, Donald Trump has repeatedly threatened to intervene if the Ayatollah's regime starts a bloody massacre in the streets of Iran.
Iran, perhaps more than ever before, is striving for freedom. The United States is ready to help.
According to the American press, the White House has already discussed possible targets for attacks on Iranian territory. Sources from the Wall Street Journal report that the US may carry out a large-scale airstrike on several Iranian military targets.
The Americans will help defend freedom in Iran, but how exactly this will be implemented is really hard to say, because Iran, like a wounded animal, can bite back and bite back quite painfully. Official Tehran has already stated in principle that if there are acts of military escalation from any US bases in the region, this will completely free their hands for a retaliatory strike.
If the protesters, with or without US support, do succeed and the regime of religious fanatics falls, the Russian dictator will lose yet another bloody and authoritarian ally, following Assad and Maduro.
If the current regime in Iran is significantly weakened, if the internal destabilization within the country continues to escalate, and if the United States truly does get actively involved in these unfolding events, then of course, this critical situation will undoubtedly weaken Putin's authoritarian regime, because he will inevitably lose his crucial partner and many significant arguments in the ongoing protracted war against Ukraine, of course, which would have profound geopolitical implications.
Putin will lose an ally in Russia's war against Ukraine. Tehran helps Moscow economically by circumventing Western sanctions, and in addition also provides military technical support.
The Shaheeds appeared. Yes, that's the name of the Iranian drones that were purchased in large quantities from Iran and which were upgraded during the course of the Russian-Ukrainian war. And in fact, Iran, as far as we can tell, helped to scale up the production of various types of drones, including on the territory of the Russian Federation.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share. See you next time.